45 years of marriage crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. I stood frozen in my own doorway, car keys still clutched in my trembling hand, free, watching my husband of nearly half a century kiss another woman on the sofa, where we'd shared countless quiet evenings together. The betrayal cut so deep I couldn't even breathe. But what shattered me wasn't just what I saw. It was realizing that the man I'd loved and trusted with my whole heart had become a stranger. And I'd been living with that stranger for months without knowing it. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Margaret Henderson, but everyone has always called me Maggie. I'm 72 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was Bob Henderson's wife. I was a retired third-grade teacher who'd spent 38 years shaping young minds free. I was a mother of 3 wonderful children who'd grown up and moved to different corners of the country to build their own lives. I was a grandmother who sent birthday cards that never arrived late and Christmas presents that were always wrapped in paper I'd saved from the year before. Free, I lived in a tidy 2-story house on Maple Street in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least we thought we did. Bob and I had bought the house in 1982 when our youngest, Tommy, was just starting kindergarten. The mortgage had been paid off for 15 years, and we'd settled into what I believed was the comfortable routine of retirement. Our days followed a predictable pattern that I found soothing. Bob would wake up at 6:30 every morning, shower, and come downstairs to find his coffee already brewing and his newspaper folded beside his favorite blue ceramic mug. I'd been setting out that mug for 45 years. While he read the sports section and muttered about whatever team had disappointed him the night before, I'd prepare our breakfast, usually scrambled eggs with whole wheat toast, sometimes oatmeal if the weather was particularly cold. After breakfast, Bob would retreat to his workshop in the garage, free, where he'd tinker with small woodworking projects or organize his collection of tools that seemed to multiply mysteriously. I'd clean the kitchen, start a load of laundry, and then settle into my routine of reading, light gardening, or working on whatever quilting project was currently spread across the dining room table. We'd reconvene for lunch, usually sandwiches and soup, and then Bob would often drive to the hardware store or the coffee shop downtown where he'd meet up with other retired men to discuss politics and complain about how different the world had become. I'd use those afternoons for my own errands, grocery shopping, library visits, or coffee with my friend Sarah Chen, who'd taught 4th grade in the classroom right next to mine for 22 years. Evenings were our time together. We'd eat dinner while watching the 6 o'clock news, then settle into our respective spots in the living room. Bob had his brown leather recliner, cracked and worn in all the places his body had shaped it over the years. I had my corner of the sofa, with the good reading lamp and the basket where I kept my current book, reading glasses, and whatever handwork I was doing. We didn't talk much during those evening hours, but I found the silence companionable. We'd lived together long enough that words often seemed unnecessary. Bob would watch his shows, usually something involving fishing, hunting, or men rebuilding old cars, while I read or worked on my quilting. Sometimes he'd doze off in his chair, and I'd gently wake him at 9:30 to remind him it was time to lock up and head to bed. It was a quiet life, but I thought it was a good life. After the chaos of raising 3 children, managing a classroom full of energetic 8-year-olds, and all the rushing and scheduling and worrying that fills up the middle years of marriage, I'd welcomed the peace of our retirement routine. Looking back now, I realize I mistook silence for contentment. I confused routine for connection, and I failed to notice that somewhere along the way, the comfortable quiet between us had become something else entirely, a distance that grew wider with each passing day until we were like 2 polite strangers sharing the same house. The first sign that something was changing came in early February, though I didn't recognize it as a sign at the time. Bob started showering twice a day. For 45 years, he'd been a once-a-day shower man, first thing in the morning, in and out in 8 minutes flat. Suddenly, he was taking long showers in the evening too, using up all the hot water and leaving the bathroom steamy and smelling like the expensive cologne Tommy had given him for Christmas 2 years earlier. Cologne that had been sitting unopened in our medicine cabinet ever since. When I mentioned it, Bob just shrugged and said he'd been working in the garage more and felt grimy by evening. It seemed reasonable enough. Spring was coming, and he'd mentioned wanting to build some new garden boxes for my vegetables. Then came the phone calls. Bob had never been much of a phone talker. When our children called, he'd exchange a few pleasantries and then hand the phone to me. But suddenly, his cell phone was ringing at odd hours, and he'd step outside to take the calls. Free, saying they were from his buddy Jerry about some fishing trip they were planning. I found it strange, because Bob had never been much of a planner when it came to fishing. He was more of a throw the tackle box in the truck and see where the day takes us kind of fisherman. But people change, I told myself. Maybe retirement was making him more social, more interested in making concrete plans. The changes were subtle at first, the kind of things that make you pause for just a moment before your rational mind provides a perfectly logical explanation. Bob started asking me about my schedule more often. When was my next book club meeting? What time was my doctor's appointment? Had I made plans with Sarah for the week? I thought he was being more attentive, more interested in my day-to-day life. He began volunteering to run errands that he'd previously left entirely to me. Grocery shopping had always been my domain. But suddenly Bob was offering to pick up milk or bread, always from the store on the other side of town, rather than our usual grocery store 3 blocks away. He said their meat department was better, their prices lower. Again, it seemed reasonable. What should have been the biggest red flag was how good he looked. At 74, Bob had always been what I'd call pleasantly rumpled. His hair, what was left of it, was usually messy by noon. His clothes were clean but rarely coordinated, and he'd developed the soft belly and stooped shoulders that come with age and retirement. But sometime around March, Bob started standing straighter. He began asking me to trim his hair more often, and he started wearing shirts I didn't remember buying him. When I complimented him on a particularly nice blue button-down, he said he'd picked it up at the department store while he was waiting for me during my dental cleaning. I should have been suspicious, but instead I felt pleased. After years of watching Bob settle into what I thought was premature old age, it seemed like he was taking more pride in his appearance. I thought maybe he was finally adjusting to retirement, finding his footing in this new phase of our lives. The morning of April 15th started like any other morning. Bob was up at his usual time, showered and downstairs for breakfast. I'd made his coffee, set out his mug, and prepared scrambled eggs with wheat toast. He read his paper, made his customary grumbling noises about the state of the world, and announced he'd be spending the day in the garage, working on a new project. I had a doctor's appointment scheduled for 11 o'clock, just a routine check-up with Dr. Martinez, who'd been monitoring my blood pressure for the past few years. Bob offered to drive me, which was unusual since I'd always handled my own medical appointments, but I appreciated the gesture. We drove to the medical complex in comfortable silence, and Bob dropped me off at the entrance with a promise to pick me up in an hour. I settled into the waiting room with the book I'd brought and prepared for the usual delay that seemed to be part of every medical appointment. But Dr. Martinez was running unusually on time that day. After just 20 minutes, I found myself back in the parking lot, appointment completed, and next visit scheduled for 6 months in the future. Bob wasn't there yet, which didn't surprise me. I'd told him to come back in an hour, and it had only been half that. I could have called him to come early, but it was a beautiful spring morning, and I decided to walk home instead. The medical complex was only 8 blocks from our house, and I thought the exercise would do me good. I'd been feeling sluggish lately, spending too many hours sitting with my quilting or curled up with a book. The walk was lovely. Trees were budding, early flowers were pushing up through the soil in well-tended gardens, and the air had that fresh, hopeful smell that comes with spring. I felt energetic and optimistic as I turned onto our street, thinking I'd surprise Bob by arriving home early. Maybe we could have lunched together, and I could finally convince him to tell me about this mysterious garage project he'd been working on. Our house looked peaceful in the morning sunlight. Bob's truck was in the driveway, and I could see that the garage door was closed, which meant he was probably inside working. I smiled to myself, imagining his surprise when I appeared an hour ahead of schedule. I unlocked the front door quietly, thinking I might be able to sneak through the house and surprise him in the garage. The living room looked exactly as I'd left it, my book and reading glasses on the side table, Bob's newspaper folded neatly beside his recliner. The throw pillows arranged the way I always arranged them. but something felt different. There was an energy in the house, a sense of presence that made me pause in the entryway. I could hear voices, low intimate voices, coming from the living room. At first, I thought Bob might have the television on, though that would have been unusual for him in the middle of the morning. But as I stood there, listening more carefully, I realized the voices were real. Bob was talking to someone, and that someone was responding in a voice I recognized, but couldn't immediately place. I moved quietly toward the living room, my heart beginning to beat faster, though I couldn't have said why. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the way Bob's voice sounded, softer and warmer than it had sounded when he'd spoken to me in months. I stepped into the doorway of the living room and froze. Bob was sitting on our sofa, where we'd watched television together for 22 years, where I'd nursed our children through countless illnesses, where we'd wrapped Christmas presents and folded laundry and lived our quiet, ordinary life together. But he wasn't alone. Linda Morrison, our neighbor from 2 houses down, was sitting beside him. Not just beside him, but close enough that their knees were touching. Bob's arm was around her shoulders, and as I watched in stunned silence, he leaned down and kissed her forehead with a tenderness I hadn't seen from him in years. They were both fully clothed, but there was an intimacy in the way they sat together that was more shocking to me than if I'd found them in bed. This wasn't just physical, this was emotional, romantic. The kind of closeness that comes from time and trust and shared feelings. Linda was saying something in a voice so soft I couldn't make out the words, but Bob was nodding and stroking her hair, her long, dark hair that was nothing like my short, practical gray hair. She looked up at him with an expression I recognized, because I'd once looked at him the same way, back in the early years of our marriage, when every moment together felt precious and new. I don't know how long I stood there. It might have been seconds or minutes. Time seemed to have stopped working properly. My mind was scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing, to find some innocent explanation that would make this scene something other than what it obviously was. But there was no innocent explanation. This was my husband of 40, 5 years holding another woman in our living room, in our home, on our furniture, with a gentleness and attention he hadn't shown me in longer than I could remember. I must have made some sound, a gasp or a small cry, because suddenly Bob looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. The expression on his face went through several rapid changes: surprise, guilt, fear, and then something that looked almost like relief. Linda turned to see what Bob was looking at, and her face went white when she saw me. She immediately moved away from Bob, smoothing her hair and straightening her clothes, though they hadn't been disheveled. Somehow that made it worse. They'd been sitting there fully dressed, in broad daylight, in my living room, because they were comfortable enough with each other and confident enough in their secret that they felt safe. "Maggie," Bob said, and his voice cracked like a teenager's. You're home early." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I was still holding my purse and car keys, still wearing my good jacket that I'd put on for the doctor's appointment. I felt ridiculous standing there, like an unwelcome visitor in my own home. Linda stood up quickly, smoothing her skirt and avoiding my eyes. "I should go," she said, and her voice sounded strange, higher than usual, strained with embarrassment and something else I couldn't identify. "Linda," Bob said, and there was something in the way he said her name that cut through me like a knife. It was the same tone he'd once used for my name. Back when we were young and newly married, and still discovering each other. She looked at him, and they shared one of those wordless communications that couples develop over time. It lasted only a second, but I saw it, and I understood that this wasn't new, wasn't sudden, wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a relationship. A real relationship, with its own language and understanding and history that I knew nothing about. Linda walked past me without looking at me, murmuring something that might have been an apology or might have been nothing at all. I heard the front door open and close, free, and then Bob and I were alone in the living room that suddenly felt like foreign territory. "How long?" I asked, and I was surprised that my voice sounded almost normal. Bob looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, trying to decide how much truth he owed me, how much he could get away with, what version of this story might cause the least damage. "Maggie," he said again, "we should talk." But I wasn't ready to talk. I wasn't ready for explanations or justifications, or whatever Bob thought he needed to say to make this right. I was 72 years old, and I'd just discovered that the life I thought I was living was a lie, I turned and walked upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom, I supposed, and sat down on the edge of the bed Bob and I had shared for 45 years. I could hear him moving around downstairs, could hear the soft murmur of his voice as he made what I assumed was a phone call. Probably calling Linda, I thought. Probably telling her that the secret was out and they needed to figure out what to do next. I sat there for a long time, still wearing my good jacket, still holding my purse, trying to understand how my ordinary Tuesday morning had turned into the day my marriage ended. Because that's what this was, I realized. This wasn't something we could talk through or work out or put behind us. This was the end of everything I'd thought I knew about my life. And the worst part, the part that made my chest ache and my hands shake, wasn't just that Bob was having an affair. It was that he looked happier with Linda than I'd seen him look in years. I don't remember how long I sat on the edge of our bed that day, still wearing my good jacket and clutching my purse like it was the only solid thing left in my world. The afternoon sun moved across the bedroom floor, casting different shadows as the hours passed, but I felt frozen in time, trapped in that moment when everything I'd believed about my life had shattered. Eventually, I heard Bob's footsteps on the stairs. He climbed slowly, like a man walking to his execution, and I could hear him pause outside the bedroom door before finally knocking on his own bedroom door, as if he no longer had the right to simply walk in. "Maggie?" His voice was tentative. "Careful. Can we talk?" I looked toward the door but didn't answer. What was there to say? What words could possibly make sense of what I'd witnessed? After a moment, I heard him go back downstairs. A little later, I heard the front door close and his truck start up in the driveway. He was leaving, probably going to Linda's house to figure out their next move. The thought should have made me angry, but instead it made me feel hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only an empty shell. As evening fell, I finally moved. I took off my good jacket, hung it carefully in the closet next to Bob's clothes. Clothes I now wondered if Linda had helped him pick out. I changed into my nightgown, brushed my teeth, and went through all the motions of getting ready for bed. But I knew I wouldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how I'd missed it. How had my husband of 45 years developed feelings for another woman without me noticing? How long had this been going on? And how many people knew about it while I remained oblivious? Bob came home sometime after midnight. I heard his truck in the driveway, heard him fumbling with his keys at the front door. He moved quietly through the house, but I could track his progress by the familiar sounds. The creak of the third step from the bottom, the way the bathroom door stuck and required a little extra push to close properly. He stood outside our bedroom door for a long time. I could see his shadow in the strip of light under the door, could hear him breathing, but he didn't come in. Instead, I heard him go down the hall to the guest room, and a few minutes later, I heard the springs of the single bed as he lay down. We'd crossed some invisible line. After 45 years of sharing a bed, Bob was sleeping in another room, and somehow that felt as significant as everything else that had happened. I must have dozed eventually, because I woke to the sound of the coffee maker starting up at 6:30, just like always. For a moment, in that fuzzy space between sleep and waking, I thought maybe the whole thing had been a terrible dream, but then reality crashed back, and I remembered that nothing would ever be, just like always, again. I got up, showered, and dressed, going through my morning routine on autopilot. When I came downstairs, Bob was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and newspaper, but he looked up when I entered, something he rarely did anymore. "Good morning," he said quietly. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from him, the kitchen table suddenly feeling like a negotiating table between two opposing countries. "How long, Bob?" I asked again. He folded his newspaper carefully, buying time. "Maggie, it's not what you think." "Don't." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "Don't insult me by pretending I didn't see what I saw. Don't tell me it's not what I think when I know exactly what I think. Just answer the question. How long?" Bob stared down at his coffee mug, the same blue ceramic mug I'd been setting out for him every morning for decades. "About 6 months, he said finally. 6 months. While I'd been quilting and reading and maintaining our comfortable routine, my husband had been falling in love with another woman. 6 months of secret phone calls and mysterious errands and evening showers with expensive cologne. How did it start? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Bob rubbed his forehead, suddenly looking every one of his 74 years. She was having trouble with her kitchen sink. Remember when she asked if I could take a look at it? This was back in October. I did remember. Linda had knocked on our door on a Saturday afternoon, explaining that her kitchen faucet was leaking and she didn't know who to call. Bob had volunteered to help, and I'd thought it was neighborly of him. I'd even sent him over with a plate of the chocolate chip cookies I'd made that morning. I fixed the sink, Bob continued, and she invited me to stay for coffee. We got to talking, and he trailed off, as if the rest of the story was too complicated to explain. And what, Bob? You discovered you had so much in common. You realized she understood you in ways I never could. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. It wasn't like that, he said, but his protest sounded weak. Then what was it like? Help me understand how you go from fixing someone's kitchen sink to kissing them in our living room. Bob was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words cut deeper than I expected. She listens to me, Maggie. When I talk, she actually listens. She asks questions about my woodworking projects, about the books I'm reading, about what I think about things. When was the last time you asked me what I thought about anything? The accusation stung because there was truth in it. When had I stopped asking Bob what he thought? When had our conversations become limited to logistics and schedules and the mundane details of keeping a household running? So this is my fault? I asked. No, Bob said quickly. That's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to explain how it happened. I'm not trying to blame you. But it felt like blame. It felt like he was saying that I'd been such an inadequate wife that he'd had no choice but to seek companionship elsewhere. What do you want, Bob? Do you want a divorce? Do you want to be with Linda? He looked startled by the directness of the question. I don't know, he said. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me. You are hurting me. Every day for 6 months, you've been lying to me, and that's been hurting me even if I didn't know it. We sat in silence for a while, both of us staring at our coffee cups, both of us probably thinking about how we'd gotten to this place. What do you want to do? Bob asked eventually. It was such a reasonable question, but I realized I had no idea how to answer it. What does a 72-year-old woman do when she discovers her marriage has been a lie? What options did I have? I need to think, I said finally. I need some time to figure out what I'm feeling and what I want. Bob nodded. Should I stay somewhere else for a while? Part of me wanted to say yes, free to have him pack his bags and leave so I could process this in private. But another part of me was terrified of being alone in the house we'd shared for so many years. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know what I want you to do. After breakfast, Bob retreated to his garage workshop, and I found myself wandering through our house like a stranger, seeing everything with new eyes. The family photos on the mantel looked different now, all those pictures of Bob and me at anniversaries and holidays and family gatherings. Had he been genuinely happy in those moments? Or had he been going through the motions, waiting for something better to come along? I picked up our wedding album, something I hadn't looked at in years, and flipped through the pages. There we were at 27 and 29, young and hopeful and absolutely certain that our love would last forever. Bob in his rented tuxedo, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Me in my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, looking at him like he was the answer to every prayer I'd ever prayed. What had happened to those people? When had we stopped looking at each other like that? The doorbell rang around noon, startling me out of my memories. Through the front window, I could see Sarah Chen standing on my porch, holding what looked like a covered dish. Sarah had been my closest friend for over 20 years. We'd taught in adjoining classrooms, spent countless lunch breaks together, and stayed close even after retirement. If anyone would understand what I was going through, it would be Sarah. I opened the door, and Sarah took one look at my face and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Oh honey, she said, setting her dish on the hall table and pulling me into a hug. I heard. You heard. I pulled back to look at her. Heard what? Sarah looked uncomfortable. About Bob and Linda. I'm so sorry, Maggie. I wanted to tell you, but I wasn't sure. And I didn't want to hurt you if I was wrong. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. You knew. I suspected. I saw them together at the coffee shop downtown a few weeks ago. And the way they were sitting, the way they were looking at each other, it didn't look like a casual conversation between neighbors. So other people had seen them. Other people had known or suspected while I remained clueless. The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Sarah sat down on the sofa, the same sofa where I'd found Bob and Linda the day before, and patted the cushion beside her. Because I hoped I was wrong, and because, oh, Maggie! How do you tell your best friend that her husband is cheating on her? What if I'd been mistaken? What if there was some innocent explanation? I sat down beside her, feeling older than I ever had in my life. There wasn't an innocent explanation. I know. Linda Morrison called me this morning, crying and apologizing and asking me to check on you. She said you'd found them together yesterday. Linda had called Sarah. My husband's mistress was worried about my well-being and had asked my best friend to check on me. The whole situation was so bizarre I almost laughed. What did she say? I asked. Sarah hesitated. She said she never meant for it to happen. She said she knows she's broken up a marriage and she feels terrible about it. She said Bob is planning to end it. Bob is planning to end it. The words came out louder than I'd intended. He gets to decide when it ends. What about what I want? That's not what I meant, Sarah said quickly. I just meant that Linda thinks Bob is going to choose his marriage over the affair. But I wasn't sure that's what I wanted anymore. How could I stay married to someone who'd been living a double life for 6 months? How could I trust him again? How could I look at him without seeing Linda in his arms? I brought you some soup, Sarah said, changing the subject. And I thought maybe you'd like some company today. I was grateful for Sarah's presence, but I also felt like I needed to be alone to think. Everything was happening too fast. Yesterday I'd thought I had a stable marriage, and today I was supposed to figure out whether I wanted to save it or end it. Sarah, I said, can I ask you something? Anything? Do you think I'm boring? Sarah looked startled. What, Maggie, no. Why would you ask that? Bob said Linda listens to him. He said she asks him questions about his projects and his thoughts. He made it sound like I don't do those things. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. Marriage is complicated, honey. People change over the years, and sometimes couples grow apart without realizing it. That doesn't mean it's anyone's fault. And it certainly doesn't excuse what Bob did. But her careful answer told me that maybe there was some truth to Bob's accusation. Maybe I had stopped being curious about his inner life. Maybe we'd both settled into a routine that was comfortable but not particularly intimate. The thing is, I said, I don't know if I want to fight for this marriage, or if I want to walk away from it. And I hate that I don't know that about myself. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. You don't have to decide today, Maggie. You don't have to decide this week or even this month. Take your time. Figure out what you're feeling first, and then worry about what you want to do. We spent the rest of the afternoon together, and Sarah's presence was comforting, but she couldn't answer the questions that were plaguing me. Only I could do that, and I wasn't sure where to start. That evening, Bob knocked on the bedroom door again. Maggie, I made dinner. Just sandwiches, but if you're hungry. I was hungry, I realized. I'd barely eaten since the day before. I'll be down in a minute. I called back. We ate our sandwiches in silence, the kitchen table feeling like a chasm between us. Every few minutes, Bob would start to say something and then stop, as if he couldn't find the right words. Finally, as we were cleaning up, he said, I ended it today. I called Linda and told her it was over. I stopped loading the dishwasher and looked at him. Just like that. It was the right thing to do, he said. I made a mistake, and I'm sorry. I want to try to fix this, Maggie. I want to fix us. But I wasn't sure we could be fixed. How do you repair trust that's been shattered? How do you go back to the way things were when you now know that the way things were wasn't enough to keep your husband faithful? What did she say? I asked. Bob looked uncomfortable. She was upset. She said she understood, but she was upset. Of course she was upset. She'd been in a relationship for 6 months, and now it was ending because the man she cared about had been caught by his wife. I almost felt sorry for her. Bob, I said, hunting the affair doesn't fix what's broken between us. You say you want to save our marriage, but what marriage are we saving? The one where we barely talk to each other. The one where we go through the motions of being a couple without actually connecting. He didn't have an answer for that, and neither did I. That night, Bob slept in the guest room again, and I lay in our empty bed thinking about the choices ahead of me. I could forgive him and try to rebuild our marriage. I could leave him and start over at 72. Or I could stay in this limbo, neither forgiving nor leaving, just existing in the ruins of what we'd once had. None of the options felt right, but I was beginning to understand that maybe there was no right choice in a situation like this. Maybe there were only different kinds of difficult, and I had to decide which kind of difficult I could live with. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I found myself thinking about something Sarah had said. Take your time. Figure out what you're feeling first. But what I was feeling was more complicated than hurt or anger or betrayal. What I was feeling, underneath all of that, was something I hadn't expected. Relief. Relief that the pretense was over. Relief that I no longer had to wonder why Bob seemed distant, why our conversations felt strained, why the comfortable routine of our marriage had started to feel more like a prison than a partnership. For 6 months, something had been wrong, and now I knew what it was. The knowing was painful, but it was also liberating in a way I hadn't anticipated. Maybe that was where I needed to start. Not with forgiveness or anger or decisions about the future, but with the simple acknowledgement that our marriage had been in trouble long before Linda Morrison came into the picture. And maybe, just maybe, that trouble had been visible to both of us, even if we'd been too afraid or too stubborn to admit it. 3 days passed in a strange sort of limbo. Bob and I moved around each other like careful strangers, both of us trying to figure out the rules of this new reality we found ourselves in. He continued sleeping in the guest room, continued making his coffee at 6:30, continued retreating to his workshop after breakfast. But now there was a hesitation in everything he did, as if he was asking permission for actions that had been automatic for 45 years. I maintained my routines too, making breakfast, tidying the house, working on my quilting. But everything felt different. The silence between us, which had once felt comfortable, now felt loaded with unspoken words and unasked questions. We were like actors who'd forgotten our lines, going through the motions of being married without knowing what came next. On Thursday morning, Bob did something that changed everything. I was in the kitchen, rinsing my coffee cup, when he appeared beside me with a piece of paper in his hand. "Maggie," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "Linda asked me to give this to you." I stared at the folded paper as if it might bite me. "What is it?" "A letter," she wanted to explain, to apologize, I guess. My first instinct was to refuse to take it. What could Linda Morrison possibly have to say to me? What explanation could she offer for carrying on an affair with my husband? But curiosity won out over pride, and I took the paper from Bob's hand. "Did you read it?" I asked. Bob shook his head. "She sealed it and asked me to give it to you exactly as it was." I carried the letter to the living room and sat down in my usual spot on the sofa, the same sofa where I'd found them together just 4 days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. The letter was written on simple notebook paper, in careful handwriting. "Dear Margaret, I don't know if you'll read this, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away without opening it. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now. I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. When I asked Bob to help with my kitchen sink, it truly was just about a broken faucet. I wasn't looking for anything more than a neighbor's help. But we got to talking, and for the first time since my divorce was finalized, I felt like someone actually saw me. Not the bitter ex-wife or the woman who couldn't keep her marriage together, but just me. Bob listened when I talked about my fears and my loneliness, and I listened when he talked about feeling invisible in his own life. I know that doesn't excuse what we did. I know we were both married to other people. You and I both know that marriage doesn't end just because someone moves into the guest bedroom. But somewhere along the way, our friendship became something more, and I was selfish enough to let it happen. I want you to know that Bob loves you, Margaret. Even when we were together, he talked about you with affection and respect. He talked about your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. He never spoke badly about you or blamed you for anything. If anything, he blamed himself for letting your marriage drift into routine. I'm not writing this letter to ask for your forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. I'm writing to tell you that Bob is a good man who made a bad choice, and I'm the one who helped him make it. If you decide you can't forgive him, I understand. But if you're willing to try to save your marriage, I think it's worth saving. I'm moving away at the end of the month. I've already put my house on the market. It's not just because of this situation. I've been thinking about relocating closer to my daughter for a while now. But knowing that I've caused so much pain makes the decision easier. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive both of us, but mostly I hope you can find whatever will make you happy, whether that's with Bob or without him. Sincerely, Linda Morrison. I read the letter twice, then set it down and stared out the window at Linda's house 2 doors down. I could see her car in the driveway and wondered if she was watching my house, waiting to see if I'd read her words. The letter didn't make me feel better, exactly, but it didn't make me feel worse either. There was something honest about it that I appreciated, even if I wasn't ready to forgive her. She wasn't making excuses or trying to shift blame, and she wasn't asking for anything other than understanding. What struck me most was her description of Bob feeling invisible in his own life. Was that how he felt? Had I made him feel invisible? That afternoon, while Bob was running errands, I called my daughter Jennifer in Seattle. Jennifer was my middle child, the most level-headed of my 3 children, and the one who'd always been my best sounding board when I needed to talk through a problem. Jennifer's voice was concerned. Is everything okay? You never call in the middle of the week. How do you tell your 43-year-old daughter that her father is having an affair? How do you shatter her image of her parents' marriage without destroying her faith in love altogether? Jennifer, I said, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear. I told her everything, the discovery, the 6 months of lies, Linda's letter. Jennifer listened without interrupting, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I described finding Bob and Linda together. Oh, Mom, she said when I finished. I'm so sorry. I can't believe Dad would do this. I couldn't believe it either, I said. But apparently, people can surprise you even after 45 years of marriage. What are you going to do? It was the same question Bob had asked, the same question I'd been asking myself for days. I don't know. Honey, I honestly don't know. Do you want me to come home? I could fly out this weekend. Part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to have my daughter here to hold my hand and help me figure out what to do. But another part of me knew this was something I had to work through on my own. Not yet, I said, but maybe soon. I just need some time to think. Mom, Jennifer said carefully, can I ask you something? Of course. Have you and Dad been happy? I mean really happy. Because when I think about it, you've both seemed kind of distant the last few years. Going through the motions, you know. It was the same thing Sarah had hinted at, the same thing Linda had written about in her letter. Had our problems been that obvious to everyone but us? I thought we were content, I said. Maybe not passionate anymore, but comfortable. Happy enough. Happy enough isn't the same as happy. Mom, after I hung up, I found myself thinking about Jennifer's words. When had happy enough become my standard for marriage? When had I stopped expecting more than comfortable routine and peaceful coexistence? I went upstairs to the guest room where Bob had been sleeping and knocked on the door. Come in, he called. Bob was sitting on the narrow bed, reading a mystery novel. He looked up when I entered, and I could see hope flicker in his eyes. Can we talk? I asked. Of course. He set his book aside and patted the bed beside him. I hesitated for a moment, then sat down, careful to leave space between us. I read Linda's letter, I said. Bob nodded. What did you think? I think she's probably right about some things. About you feeling invisible, about our marriage drifting into routine. I looked at him. Is that how you felt, Bob? Invisible. He was quiet for a long moment. Not invisible exactly, but unimportant maybe. Like I could disappear tomorrow, and the only thing that would change would be who took out the trash. His words stung, but I forced myself to really hear them instead of just reacting defensively. When did you start feeling that way? I don't know. It happened gradually, I guess. After the kids left home, after we both retired, we just settled into this routine. We stopped talking about anything interesting. We stopped asking each other questions. We stopped being curious about each other. I thought about our daily interactions over the past few years. Bob was right. Our conversations had become limited to logistics. Whose turn was it to grocery shop? What did we want for dinner? Did he remember that we had dinner plans with the neighbors on Saturday? I stopped being curious about you, I admitted. I thought I already knew everything there was to know. And I stopped trying to be interesting, Bob said. I figured you weren't really listening anyway. We sat in silence, both of us contemplating the slow erosion of our connection. Bob, I said finally, why didn't you talk to me about how you were feeling? Why didn't you tell me you were lonely or bored, or whatever you were feeling? He rubbed his face with both hands. I tried, Maggie. Not directly maybe, but I tried. Remember when I suggested we take that trip to Ireland last year? You said it was too expensive, and we were too old to be traipsing around foreign countries. I did remember. Bob had brought home a brochure about Irish tours, and I'd dismissed the idea almost immediately. I'd thought he was just daydreaming, not making a real suggestion. Or when I asked if you wanted to take those dance lessons at the community center. You said you didn't want to make a fool of yourself in front of strangers. I remembered that too. The community center had offered ballroom dance classes for seniors, and Bob had mentioned it several times. I'd assumed he was just making conversation, not expressing a genuine interest. I wasn't trying to hurt you, I said. I just thought. I don't know what I thought. You thought we were fine the way we were, Bob said. And maybe I should have been more direct about wanting something different. Maybe I should have insisted instead of just dropping hints and hoping you'd pick up on them. So you found someone who did pick up on your hints. Bob flinched. It wasn't like that. Linda didn't replace you, Maggie. She made me remember what it felt like to have someone be interested in what I was thinking. But that's exactly what she replaced, I said. She replaced the part of me that used to be interested in what you were thinking. The part of me that used to ask questions and listen to your answers and care about your dreams. Bob looked at me with something that might have been relief. Yes, he said. That's exactly what happened. It was a painful realization, but it was also clarifying. Linda hadn't stolen my husband. She'd filled a void that I'd helped create through years of benign neglect. The question is, I said, can we get that back? Can we become people who are interested in each other again? I don't know, Bob said honestly, but I'd like to try. If you're willing. I looked at him sitting on the narrow guest room bed, looking older and more uncertain than I'd seen him in years. This was my husband, the man I'd married when we were both young and full of dreams. Somewhere along the way, we'd stopped dreaming together, stopped being curious about each other's inner lives, stopped making the effort that love requires. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay, do you love her? Linda, I mean, do you love her, or was it just the attention and the novelty? Bob was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I thought I did. For a while, I thought I did. But I think what I loved was the feeling of being important to someone again. The feeling of being seen and heard and wanted. And now I realize that what I really want is to feel that way with you. To be important to you again. To have you see me and hear me and want me. It wasn't a declaration of undying love, but it was honest, and somehow that meant more to me than pretty words would have. Bob, I said, I can't promise that we can fix this. I can't promise that I can get past the hurt and the betrayal, and I can't promise that we can find our way back to being the people we were when we first fell in love. I know, he said, but I'm willing to try. If you're really willing to do the work, real work, not just ending the affair and hoping everything goes back to normal, then I'm willing to try. Bob reached over and took my hand. It was the first time he'd touched me since the day I'd found him with Linda, and his fingers felt both familiar and foreign. I'm willing, he said. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. That night, Bob slept in the guest room again, but for the first time since I'd discovered his affair, the distance between us felt like a choice rather than a punishment. We weren't ready to share a bed again. I wasn't ready for that level of intimacy. But we were ready to start the difficult work of rebuilding trust. I lay in the dark thinking about forgiveness and second chances and the difference between the marriage we'd had and the marriage we might be able to create. I thought about Linda's letter and Jennifer's question and Bob's admission that he'd felt invisible in his own life. Most of all, I thought about the fact that at 72 years old, I was about to embark on the hardest work of my life, learning how to fall in love with my husband all over again. But first, I had to figure out how to forgive him. And more challenging still, I had to figure out how to forgive myself for the part I'd played in letting our marriage drift into comfortable indifference. The road ahead looked long and uncertain, but for the first time in days, I felt something that might have been hope. The next morning, I woke up with what I thought was renewed determination to work on our marriage. Bob and I had agreed to try, and I wanted to believe that good intentions and honest conversations would be enough to bridge the gap that had opened between us over the years. But life, I was about to learn, had other plans. I came downstairs to find Bob already dressed and putting on his jacket. It was only 8 o'clock, earlier than he usually went anywhere. Where are you going? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Hardware store, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Need some screws for the project I'm working on. Something in his tone made me pause. After 45 years of marriage, you develop an instinct for when your spouse isn't telling you the whole truth. Yesterday, we'd had that honest conversation about rebuilding our relationship. Today, Bob was already being evasive again. What project? I asked. Just some shelving for the garage, he said, still not looking at me directly. I wanted to let it go. I wanted to trust that he was telling me the truth, and that my suspicions were just a product of recent events making me paranoid. But something inside me had shifted over the past week. I was no longer willing to accept vague answers or half-truths. Bob, I said, look at me. He finally met my eyes, and I could see guilt written all over his face. Are you going to see Linda? I asked. The question hung in the air between us. Bob's shoulders sagged, and he sank into one of the kitchen chairs. She called this morning, he said quietly. She's upset about the letter she wrote to you. She wanted to talk. My stomach dropped. Less than 24 hours after promising to work on our marriage, Bob was already planning to see the woman he'd been having an affair with. And you said yes. I said I'd meet her for coffee. Just to talk. She's really upset, Maggie. And I feel responsible? You feel responsible, I repeated, my voice getting sharper. You feel responsible for Linda's feelings, but what about mine? What about the promise you made to me yesterday? Bob looked stricken. It's not like that. I'm not choosing her over you. I just thought. What, Bob? What did you think? That you could comfort your ex-mistress and come home to work on your marriage like nothing happened. I thought I owed her a conversation. A proper goodbye. I stared at him, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. Yesterday I'd been willing to believe that we could rebuild our relationship through mutual effort and good faith. But here was Bob, barely 12 hours later, prioritizing Linda's emotional needs over mine. Let me ask you something, I said, sitting down across from him. If the situation were reversed, if I had been having an affair and the man I'd been seeing was upset and wanted to talk to me, would you want me to go comfort him? Bob opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. We both knew what his answer would be. This is exactly what I was afraid of, I continued. You say you want to save our marriage, but you're still more concerned about Linda's feelings than mine. You're still putting her first. That's not true, Bob protested, but his protest sounded weak even to him. Then don't go, I said simply. If saving our marriage is really your priority, then don't go see her. Bob sat there for a long moment, and I could see him struggling. Part of me wanted to take back the ultimatum. To tell him it was okay to go see Linda if it would make him feel better. That's what the old Maggie would have done. Prioritized Bob's comfort over her own needs, avoided conflict to keep the peace. But the old Maggie had been married to a man who was having an affair. The old Maggie had been so focused on being accommodating that she'd stopped advocating for herself. If I was going to rebuild my marriage, I couldn't do it by being the same person who had let it deteriorate in the first place. I should at least call her, Bob said finally. Tell her I can't meet her today. You should do whatever feels right to you, I said. But understand that your choice here is going to tell me everything I need to know about whether you're really committed to working on our marriage. Bob stood up slowly, took out his phone, and dialed Linda's number. I could hear her voice when she answered, though I couldn't make out her words. Linda, Bob said, I can't meet you today. Maggie and I are trying to work things out, and meeting you wouldn't be appropriate. I could hear Linda's voice rise, could hear what sounded like crying. Bob listened for a moment, then said, I understand you're upset, but this is how it has to be. I'm sorry. He hung up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. How do you feel? I asked. Terrible, he said honestly. She's really hurting, and I caused that hurt. And how do you think I feel, knowing that you almost chose to comfort her instead of working on things with me? Bob was quiet for a moment. I didn't think of it that way, he said finally. That's the problem, Bob. You're still not thinking about how your choices affect me. You're still operating like Linda's feelings matter more than mine do. I could see him processing this, could see him beginning to understand the deeper implications of what had just happened. You're right, he said. I was doing exactly what I've been doing for months, putting her needs ahead of yours without even realizing it. It was progress, but it also showed me just how much work we had ahead of us. Bob wasn't just going to flip a switch and suddenly start putting our marriage first. The patterns that had led to his affair were deeply ingrained, and changing them was going to require constant consciousness and effort. Later that morning, my phone rang. It was Linda. I stared at the phone for several rings, debating whether to answer. Finally, curiosity won out. "Hello, Linda," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Margaret?" Linda's voice was thick with tears. "I'm so sorry to call you, but I didn't know what else to do." "What do you need, Linda?" "I need to explain about this morning. Bob was going to meet me, and I know that probably hurt you, but it wasn't what you think." I felt a surge of anger. "Linda, I don't think we should be having this conversation." "Please," she said. "Just let me explain. I wasn't trying to get him back. I wasn't trying to interfere with your marriage. I'm falling apart here, Margaret. I've lost the first man I've cared about since my divorce. I've ruined a marriage. I've destroyed friendships in the neighborhood. I just needed someone to tell me that I'm not a terrible person." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. But I also felt something else. A clarity I hadn't had before. "Linda," I said, "I understand that you're hurting. But Bob can't be the person you turn to for comfort anymore. Not if he and I are going to have any chance of rebuilding our marriage." "I know that," she said, crying harder now. "I do know that. But I don't have anyone else. My daughter lives across the country. My ex-husband hates me, and everyone in the neighborhood knows what happened. Bob is the only person who understands what I'm going through." "That's exactly the problem," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Bob understands what you're going through because he went through it with you. You two have shared experiences and emotional intimacy that exclude me completely. And as long as that continues, there's no room for him to rebuild emotional intimacy with me." Linda was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more defeated. "You're right. I know you're right. I'm being selfish." "You're being human," I said, and I meant it. "But being human doesn't make it okay." After I hung up, I found myself thinking about the conversation. A week ago, I would never have been able to speak that directly to Linda. I would have been too worried about hurting her feelings, too focused on being polite and accommodating. But something had changed in me. Maybe it was anger, or maybe it was just exhaustion, with always putting other people's comfort ahead of my own needs. Bob came into the kitchen while I was making lunch. "Linda called me," I said without looking up from my sandwich making. Bob tensed. "What did she say?" "She wanted me to understand why she needed to see you this morning. She wanted reassurance that she's not a terrible person." "What did you tell her?" I turned to face him. "I told her that you can't be her source of emotional support anymore. Not if we're going to work on our marriage." Bob nodded slowly. "That makes sense. I should have realized that myself. The thing is, Bob, I don't think you did realize it. And that worries me." "What do you mean?" I sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for him to join me. "This morning, your first instinct was to go comfort Linda. When she called me, her first instinct was to call you for emotional support. Even after you've both supposedly ended the affair, you're still each other's primary emotional connection." Bob looked uncomfortable, but he didn't deny it. "How do we rebuild emotional intimacy in our marriage if you're still emotionally intimate with her?" I asked. "I don't know," Bob said honestly. "I never thought about it that way." "Here's what I think," I said. "I think the physical affair was just a symptom of the real problem. The real problem is that you developed an emotional connection with Linda that was deeper and more satisfying than the emotional connection you had with me." Bob was quiet, but I could see him thinking about what I'd said. "And ending the physical relationship doesn't automatically fix the emotional relationship," I continued. "You still care about her. You still worry about her. You still feel responsible for her happiness. And as long as that's true, there's not going to be room in your heart for the kind of emotional intimacy that our marriage needs." "So what are you saying?" Bob asked. "That we can't save our marriage. I'm saying that saving our marriage is going to require you to choose me over her in ways that you haven't been choosing me. Not just physically, but emotionally. Completely." Bob rubbed his forehead. "I don't know if I can just turn off caring about someone." "I'm not asking you to turn off caring about her," I said. "I'm asking you to stop acting on that caring in ways that take emotional energy away from our marriage." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us grappling with the complexity of what we were trying to do. "Maggie," Bob said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think you can do it?" "Do you think you can open your heart to me again, knowing what I've done?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been avoiding thinking about too deeply. "I don't know," I said honestly. A week ago, I would have said it was impossible. Today I think maybe it's possible. but it's going to require both of us to become different people than we've been. Different how? I'm going to have to stop being so accommodating that I disappear. I'm going to have to speak up for what I need and want, even when it's uncomfortable. And you're going to have to stop taking the path of least resistance in difficult situations. You're going to have to choose the hard conversation over the easy lie. Bob nodded. Like this morning, when I should have just told Linda no from the beginning, instead of agreeing to meet her and then backing out. Exactly like that. I can do that, Bob said. I want to do that. Wanting to isn't enough, I said. You wanted to save our marriage this morning too, but you still almost went to see Linda. Changing ingrained patterns is harder than just having good intentions. Bob looked at me with something that might have been respect. You're different, he said. Since all this happened, you're how so? A stronger, more direct. You're saying things to me that you never would have said before. He was right, I was different. The discovery of Bob's affair had shattered something in me, but it had also freed something. For years, I'd been so focused on keeping the peace, on being the accommodating wife, that I'd lost track of my own voice. Now, with nothing left to lose, I was finally saying what I really thought and felt. Maybe I had to lose everything to find myself again, I said. Maybe we both did, Bob replied. That evening we had our first real conversation in years. Not about logistics or schedules or household management, but about dreams and fears and the people we'd become without realizing it. Bob talked about feeling invisible, about missing the sense of purpose he'd had when he was working, about worrying that his best years were behind him. I talked about feeling like I'd shrunk over the years, like I'd become smaller and more cautious with each passing season. It wasn't easy. There were long pauses and awkward moments, and things we started to say but couldn't quite finish. But it was real in a way our conversations hadn't been real in years. When we went to bed, Bob still in the guest room, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day I'd found him with Linda, genuine hope that we might be able to find our way back to each other. But I also felt something else, a newfound respect for myself and a determination not to lose the woman I was becoming in the process of trying to save my marriage. For the first time in my adult life, I was putting myself first, and surprisingly, it didn't feel selfish. It felt like survival. 2 weeks had passed since our conversation in the guest room, and I thought we were making progress. Bob and I were talking more, not just about household logistics, but about real things. Feelings, memories, hopes for the future. He'd started joining me for my evening walks around the neighborhood, something he hadn't done in years. We'd even talked about taking that trip to Ireland he'd mentioned, the one I'd dismissed so quickly before. I was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Then I found the text messages. It was a Tuesday morning. Bob had gone to the grocery store, and I was cleaning the kitchen when his phone started buzzing on the counter. He'd forgotten it, something that would have been unthinkable during his affair. When that phone had been his lifeline to Linda, the phone buzzed again, and again. Someone was persistent. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was probably just spam calls or maybe one of his fishing buddies. But the buzzing continued, insistent and urgent. Finally, I picked up the phone, intending to silence it. But the screen was lit up with notifications, and I could see the name at the top of several text messages, Linda. My hands were shaking as I opened the messages. I told myself I had no right to read Bob's private communications, but I also told myself that a woman whose husband has been having an affair has earned the right to a little paranoia. The messages were from the night before, sent while Bob and I were having what I thought was a lovely evening together, watching a movie and sharing a bowl of popcorn. Linda, I know I shouldn't be texting, but I can't stop thinking about what you said last week about Ireland. Do you remember telling me about wanting to see the cliffs of Moher? I looked them up, and they're beautiful. Linda, I keep thinking about all the conversations we had about traveling, about seeing the world. It makes me sad that we'll never have those adventures together. Linda, I'm not trying to cause problems. I just miss talking to you. I miss having someone who understood my dreams. Linda, I know you're trying to work things out with Margaret, and I respect that, but I hope you know that what we had was real, even if it couldn't last. And then, the message that made my blood run cold, Linda. If you ever change your mind about us, you know where to find me. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, Bob's phone clutched in my trembling hands. Linda wasn't respecting our boundaries at all. She was still reaching out to him. still trying to maintain their emotional connection, still holding the door open for their relationship to resume. But what made it worse was that there were no responses from Bob. Not because he wasn't interested, but because he'd forgotten his phone at home. Which meant he hadn't seen these messages yet. When he got home from the grocery store, he was going to read Linda's nostalgic reminiscing about their relationship and her invitation to resume their affair. And I was going to find out exactly where Bob's loyalties really lay. I heard his truck pull into the driveway about 20 minutes later. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, his phone in front of me, trying to figure out how to handle what I'd discovered. "Honey, I forgot my phone," Bob said as he walked into the kitchen carrying grocery bags. "Did anyone?" He stopped when he saw me sitting there with his phone, my face pale and my hands shaking. "Maggie," his voice was careful, cautious. "What's wrong?" I picked up his phone and held it out to him. "Linda's been texting you." Bob set down the grocery bags and took his phone. I watched his face as he scrolled through the messages, watched his expression change from confusion to guilt to something that looked like pain. "Maggie," he said, "I didn't respond to these. I didn't even know she'd sent them." "I know," I said, "but now you do know, and now you have to decide how you're going to respond." Bob sat down across from me, still holding his phone. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to do whatever feels right to you," I said. "But I want you to understand that what you do next is going to determine whether we can continue trying to save our marriage." Bob looked at the phone, then back at me. "She shouldn't be texting me. We agreed that we needed to stop contact, but she is texting you. And she's making it very clear that she's still emotionally invested in your relationship, and that she's willing to pick up where you left off if you change your mind about working things out with me." Bob was quiet for a long moment, reading through the messages again. "What hurts the most," I continued, "is that she's talking about dreams you shared with her. Dreams about traveling, about Ireland, about seeing the world. Dreams that you apparently shared with her but never really shared with me." Bob's face crumpled. "Maggie, that's not true. I did share those dreams with you. I tried to. But you weren't interested." "I was interested in going to Ireland with my husband," I said. "I wasn't interested in going to Ireland with someone who was already planning fantasy trips there with another woman." The words hung in the air between us. Bob looked stricken, like he was finally understanding the depth of the betrayal. "I never planned fantasy trips with Linda," he said weakly. "Then why is she talking about adventures you'll never have together? Why is she reminiscing about conversations you had about traveling and seeing the world?" Bob was quiet, and I could see him remembering those conversations, realizing how they must have sounded to Linda, how they must have fed her romantic fantasies about their relationship. "I was just talking," he said finally. "Just sharing thoughts about places I'd like to see. I didn't mean it as planning a future with her, but that's how she heard it," I said. "And the fact that you were sharing those intimate thoughts and dreams with her, instead of with me, is exactly the problem." Bob set his phone down on the table and put his head in his hands. "I don't know how to fix this, Maggie. I don't know how to undo the damage I've done. You can start by responding to those messages," I said. "Right now, while I'm sitting here." Bob looked up at me. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to say whatever you actually feel, but I want you to say it honestly, and I want you to say it in front of me." Bob picked up his phone and stared at the screen for a long time. Then he began typing. "Bob, Linda, you need to stop texting me. I understand that you're hurting, but continuing to contact me isn't fair to anyone. Not to you, not to me, and certainly not to Maggie. I'm committed to working on my marriage, and that means I can't maintain any kind of relationship with you, even a friendship. I'm going to block your number after I send this message. I hope you can find the help and support you need, but it can't come from me." He showed me the message before sending it. Then he sent it and immediately blocked Linda's number. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Sad," he said honestly, "and guilty. And scared that I've lost any chance of saving our marriage." "Why scared?" "'Cause I can see how much I've hurt you. Not just with the affair, but with all the little betrayals that led up to it. Sharing dreams with her that I should have been sharing with you. Making her feel like she was important to me while making you feel like you weren't." It was the most honest thing Bob had said since this whole mess started, and it gave me a flicker of hope. "Bob," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely truthful." "Okay. Are you in love with Linda?" Bob was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know, he said. I thought I was. For a while, I really thought I was. But now I'm not sure if I was in love with her, or if I was just in love with the way she made me feel about myself. It was a painful answer, but it was an honest one. And how do you feel about me? I asked. Right now, in this moment? How do you feel about me? Bob looked at me across the kitchen table, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. I feel like I'm looking at a stranger, he said. But a stranger I'd like to get to know. You're stronger than you used to be, more direct, more present. And I realized that for years, I took the old you for granted. The accommodating, never rock the boat you. I stopped seeing you as a person with your own thoughts and feelings and desires. And now I'm seeing you and I'm realizing what I've lost. Not just through the affair, but through years of not paying attention to who you really are. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the weight of what we'd just discussed. Maggie, Bob said finally, do you think there's any chance we can save this? Really save it, not just go back to the way things were? I thought about his question. A month ago, I would have said yes immediately. Would have been so grateful that he wanted to stay married that I would have agreed to anything. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I think there's a chance, I said carefully. But it's going to require both of us to do things we've never done before. Like what? Like you learning to choose me over Linda, not just physically but emotionally, every single time, even when it's hard, even when it hurts her feelings, even when it feels cruel. Bob nodded. I can do that. And like me learning to take up space in our marriage again. Learning to ask for what I want, to express what I need, to stop disappearing into the background of my own life. I want you to take up space, Bob said. I want you to ask for things and express needs and be present in our marriage. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when I'm asking for things you don't want to give or expressing feelings you don't want to hear. Bob hesitated, and I appreciated his honesty. It'll be an adjustment, he said, for both of us. But yes, even when it's uncomfortable. That afternoon, Bob went to Linda's house. Not to see her, but to leave a note in her mailbox asking her not to contact him again in any way. He did it while I was there, parked at the curb, watching him walk up her driveway. Linda came to the door as he was putting the note in her mailbox. I could see them talking, could see her gesturing emphatically, could see Bob shaking his head and backing away from her. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes, and then Bob walked back to the car. What did she say? I asked as he got back in. She asked me to come inside so we could talk properly. She said we owed each other a real goodbye. And you said? I said we'd already had our goodbye, and that I couldn't have any more contact with her. How did she react? Bob was quiet for a moment. She cried. She said I was being cruel. That she didn't deserve to be cut off so completely. And how did you respond? I told her I was sorry she was hurting, but that continuing any kind of relationship with her would be cruel to you. And that I'd already been cruel enough to you to last a lifetime. It was the right answer, but I could see that it had cost him something to give it. That evening, we had another long conversation. We talked about the years we'd lost to routine and complacency, about the dreams we'd stopped sharing with each other, about the slow erosion of intimacy that had made Bob vulnerable to Linda's attention in the first place. Bob asked me what I wanted our marriage to look like if we managed to save it. It was a question no one had asked me in decades, and I realized I didn't have a ready answer. I want to matter to you, I said finally. Not just as someone who keeps your house clean and makes your meals, but as a person you're curious about. I want you to ask me questions about what I'm thinking and feeling and dreaming about. I want that too, Bob said. And I want to matter to you in the same way. I want to be more than just someone who takes out the trash and mows the lawn. I want us to have adventures together, I continued. Not necessarily big ones, but new experiences. I want us to try things we've never done and go places we've never been, like Ireland. Bob asked tentatively. I thought about Linda's text messages, about her wistful references to adventures she and Bob would never have together. Like Ireland, I agreed. But I want us to plan it together, dream about it together, anticipate it together. I want it to be our adventure, not something you've already imagined with someone else. Bob nodded. I understand. And I want honesty, I said. Complete honesty. Even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. Even when it's embarrassing. I want to know what you're thinking and feeling. And I want you to know what I'm thinking and feeling. That scares me a little, Bob admitted. It scares me too, I said, but I'd rather be scared and honest than comfortable and living a lie. That night, Bob slept in the guest room again, but something had shifted between us. We weren't ready for physical intimacy. I wasn't ready to share a bed with him again, but we were building something new. Something that felt more solid than what we'd had before. As I lay in the dark, I thought about Linda's text messages and Bob's responses to them. I thought about the choice he'd made to block her number, to cut off contact completely, to choose our marriage over her feelings. It was a start. Maybe not enough to guarantee that we could save our marriage, but enough to give me hope that we might be able to build something better than what we'd lost. For the first time since I'd found Bob and Linda together, I fell asleep feeling like we might actually have a future together. But I also fell asleep knowing that the real work was just beginning. 3 weeks after Bob blocked Linda's number, I thought we had turned a corner. We were talking every day, real conversations about books we were reading, places we wanted to visit, memories from our early marriage that we'd both forgotten. Bob had started asking me questions about my day, about my thoughts on current events, about what I was working on in my quilting. For the first time in years, I felt like he was genuinely interested in my inner life. We'd even started planning that trip to Ireland. Bob had brought home travel brochures, and we'd spent several evenings looking at pictures of ancient castles and rolling green hills, talking about which regions we wanted to visit and what we wanted to see. It felt like we were rebuilding not just our relationship, but our ability to dream together. I was beginning to believe that maybe we really could create something better than what we'd lost. Then came the dinner invitation that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening in early June. Bob and I were sitting on the front porch, enjoying the cool air after a warm day, when our neighbor Carol Williams walked over from across the street. "Hello, you two," Carol said with a smile that seemed slightly forced. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," I said, gesturing to the empty chair beside us. "Would you like to sit down?" Carol shook her head. "I can't stay long. I just wanted to invite you both to a little dinner party I'm having this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just a few neighbors getting together for barbecue and conversation." It sounded lovely, and I was about to accept when Carol continued. "Linda Morrison will be there too," she said, watching our faces carefully. "I know things have been complicated between you all, but Linda's moving away next week, and I thought it might be nice to give her a proper send-off." My blood went cold. Linda was moving away, that much I knew from Bob. But the idea of sitting around Carol's dinner table, making polite conversation with my husband's former mistress was so absurd I almost laughed. "I don't think that's a good idea, Carol," I said as diplomatically as I could manage. "Oh, I understand it might be awkward," Carol said, as if we were discussing a minor social hiccup instead of an extramarital affair that had nearly destroyed my marriage. "But Linda feels terrible about what happened, and she'd really like a chance to clear the air before she leaves town. She specifically asked me to invite you both." I looked at Bob, who was sitting very still beside me, his face carefully neutral. "We appreciate the invitation," Bob said slowly, "but I think Maggie's right. It wouldn't be appropriate." Carol looked disappointed. "Are you sure? Linda's really hoping to make amends. She said she'd written you a letter, Margaret, but she never heard back from you. She thought maybe if you could all sit down together like civilized adults." "Carol," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended, "Bob had an affair with Linda. They weren't just friends who had a misunderstanding. This isn't something that can be resolved over potato salad and small talk." Carol's cheeks flushed. "I just thought, well, Linda said you were all trying to work things out, and she hoped you could part as friends." "Linda said we were all trying to work things out?" I repeated, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "When did Linda tell you that?" Carol looked uncomfortable. "Well, she mentioned it when we ran into each other at the grocery store yesterday. She said Bob had been very understanding about everything, and that you were all hoping to handle the situation maturely." I turned to look at Bob, who had gone very pale. "Bob," I said carefully, "when did you talk to Linda about us working things out?" "I didn't," Bob said quickly. "I haven't talked to Linda at all since I blocked her number." But something in his expression made me doubt his words. "Carol," I said, "I think we need to decline your invitation. And I think you should know that Linda is not accurately representing the situation to people." After Carol left, looking flustered and embarrassed, Bob and I sat in silence on the porch. The comfortable evening air that had felt so pleasant just minutes before now felt oppressive. Bob, I said finally, I need you to tell me the truth. Have you been in contact with Linda since you blocked her number? No, Bob said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Look at me, I said. Bob reluctantly turned to face me, and I could see guilt written all over his features. Have you been in contact with Linda? I asked again. Bob was quiet for a long moment, then, in a voice so low I could barely hear him, he said, She found another way to reach me. My heart started pounding. What do you mean? She created a new email account and sent me a message last week. She said she was worried about how things ended between us, and she wanted to make sure I was okay. And you responded. Bob nodded miserably. I told her I was fine and that she didn't need to worry about me. What else? She asked how things were going with you, and I told her we were working on things. That we were trying to rebuild our relationship. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. You discussed our marriage with her? Not in detail, Bob said quickly. I just said we were trying to work things out. Bob, do you understand what you've done? He looked at me with confusion and growing panic. I was just being polite. I was trying to reassure her that everything was okay. You were reassuring your former mistress about the state of our marriage! You were giving her information about our private relationship, about our attempts to reconcile. You were maintaining an emotional connection with her while telling me you'd cut off all contact. Bob's face crumpled. It wasn't like that, Maggie. It was just one email exchange. Show me? I said. Show me the emails. Right now. Bob hesitated. I deleted them. You deleted them. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Why would you delete them unless you knew they were inappropriate? I deleted them because I didn't want you to be hurt if you found them. So you knew they would hurt me, but you sent them anyway? Bob had no answer for that. I stood up from my porch chair, suddenly needing to be in motion. Bob, do you realize what you've done? Do you understand that you've been lying to me again? I wasn't lying, Bob protested. I just didn't mention the email. That's called lying by omission, I said. And it's exactly the same pattern that led to your affair in the first place. Small deceptions, little secrets, gradual boundary erosions. It was just one email exchange, Bob said again, as if repeating it would make it less significant. No, Bob, it wasn't just one email exchange. It was a choice. A choice to prioritize Linda's feelings over my trust. A choice to maintain a connection with her while telling me you'd ended all contact. A choice to discuss our marriage with the woman you had an affair with. Bob was quiet, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. And now, I continued. Linda is going around telling people that we're all working things out, and that you've been understanding about everything. She's making it sound like this is some kind of amicable situation where everyone's friends, and there are no hard feelings. That's not what I meant to convey, Bob said weakly. But that's what you did convey, and that's how she's interpreting it to other people. Our private business, our attempts to save our marriage, are now neighborhood gossip, because you couldn't resist responding to her email. I walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at our quiet street where neighbors were walking their dogs and children were playing in yards. Everything looked normal, peaceful, while my world was falling apart again. Maggie, Bob said behind me, I'm sorry. I made a mistake, but it doesn't mean I'm not committed to saving our marriage. I turned back to face him. Bob, this isn't just a mistake. This is a pattern. Every time I think we're making progress, every time I start to trust you again, you do something that shows me you're still more concerned about Linda's feelings than mine. That's not true, isn't it? 3 weeks ago, you were going to meet her for coffee until I stopped you. 2 weeks ago, you had to block her number because she was texting you romantic messages. And now I find out you've been having email conversations with her behind my back. Bob looked stricken, but he didn't deny the pattern I was describing. The problem isn't that you had an affair, I continued. The problem is that you're still having an affair. Maybe not a physical one, but an emotional one. You're still prioritizing her needs, still maintaining a connection with her, still keeping secrets from me about your interactions with her. I don't know how to fix this, Bob said, and he sounded genuinely desperate. I don't think you can fix it, I said, and the words surprised me as much as they surprised him. What do you mean? I sat back down, suddenly feeling exhausted. I mean, I don't think you're capable of choosing me over her. I don't think you know how to let go of that relationship completely. That's not fair, Bob protested. I ended the affair. I blocked her number. I've been working on our marriage. You ended the physical affair. I corrected. But you haven't ended the emotional relationship. You're still emotionally connected to her, still concerned about her feelings, still willing to risk our marriage to maintain some kind of contact with her. Bob was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I care about her, he said. I can't just turn that off. There it was. The truth I'd been afraid to hear. I know you care about her, I said. And that's exactly the problem. As long as you care about her, as long as you feel responsible for her well-being, as long as you want to maintain any kind of relationship with her, there's no room in your heart for the kind of commitment our marriage needs. So what are you saying? Bob asked. I looked at my husband of 45 years, sitting on the porch of the house we'd shared for over 2 decades, and I felt something shift inside me. I'm saying I can't do this anymore, I said. I can't keep trying to rebuild a marriage with someone who's still emotionally involved with another woman. I can't keep competing with Linda for your attention and loyalty. Bob's face went white. Maggie, please. Don't give up on us. I can do better. I can cut off contact with Linda completely. You already said you'd cut off contact with Linda completely, I reminded him. And then you responded to her email. You'll say whatever you think I want to hear, but you'll keep finding ways to maintain that connection because you can't bear to hurt her feelings. That's not true. Then prove it, I said. Show me the email exchange. Let me see exactly what you said to her and what she said to you. Bob hesitated. I told you I deleted them. Then recover them. They're still in your deleted folder unless you permanently deleted them. And if you permanently deleted them, that tells me everything I need to know about how inappropriate they were. Bob pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He opened his email app and went to his deleted folder. After a moment, he handed me the phone. There were 3 emails in the exchange, not the simple back and forth Bob had described. The first was from Linda. Bob, I hope you don't mind me reaching out this way, but I couldn't stop thinking about how we left things. I feel terrible about the way everything ended, and I wanted to make sure you're okay. I know this whole situation has been hard on everyone, especially Margaret. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday. I miss our friendship more than you know. Love, Linda. Bob's response, Linda, thanks for checking on me. I'm doing okay. Margaret and I are working on things, taking it one day at a time. It's been difficult, but we're both committed to trying to rebuild what we had. I hope you're doing well too. I know this has been hard on you as well. I don't regret the friendship we had, even though it got complicated. Take care of yourself. Bob. And Linda's final email. Bob, I'm so relieved to hear from you. I was worried you hated me. It means the world to me to know that you don't regret our friendship. I don't regret it either. It was the most meaningful relationship I've had in years. I'm glad you and Margaret are working things out. She's lucky to have someone as caring and thoughtful as you. I'm moving away at the end of the month, but I want you to know that I'll always treasure the time we had together. If you ever need a friend, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll always care about you. All my love, Linda. I read the emails twice, feeling sicker with each pass. This wasn't just polite reassurance. This was an intimate exchange between 2 people who clearly still cared deeply about each other. Bob had told Linda details about our marriage counseling efforts. Linda had told Bob she treasured their time together and would always care about him. They'd both expressed that they didn't regret their relationship. Bob, I said, handing him back his phone, this isn't one email exchange between people trying to be polite. This is a love letter exchange between 2 people who are still emotionally involved with each other. It's not a love letter, Bob protested weakly. Linda signed her email, all my love. She told you she treasures the time you had together and that she'll always care about you. You told her you don't regret your friendship. How is that not a love letter exchange? Bob had no answer. And you told her we're working on things and taking it one day at a time. You shared intimate details about our marriage with your former mistress. You made our private struggles public to the woman who helped create them. I stood up again, pacing to the edge of the porch. I can't do this, Bob, I said. I can't keep trying to save a marriage with someone who's still in love with someone else. I'm not in love with her, Bob said, but his protest sounded hollow even to him. Maybe you're not, I said. But you're not in love with her either. And that's not enough for me. I deserve better than being someone's second choice. I deserve better than having to compete with another woman for my own husband's emotional loyalty. That night, I called my daughter Jennifer and told her everything. About the email exchange, about Carol's dinner invitation, about Linda telling people we were all working things out. "Mom," Jennifer said when I finished, "I think you know what you need to do." "Do I?" "You need to stop trying to save a marriage that Dad isn't fully committed to saving." "But he says he's committed." "Mom, actions speak louder than words, and Dad's actions are telling you that he's still emotionally involved with this woman." Jennifer was right, and I knew it. But admitting it meant admitting that 45 years of marriage were over. It meant starting over at 72. It meant giving up on the life I'd built and the future I'd imagined. "I'm scared," I told my daughter. "I know you are," Jennifer said gently. "But you're also strong, stronger than you were a month ago. You've found your voice, Mom. You've learned to stand up for yourself. Don't lose that now." That night, Bob slept in the guest room as usual, but something fundamental had changed between us. We both knew it, even if neither of us wanted to say it out loud. I lay in bed thinking about the woman I'd been when this all started, accommodating, conflict avoidant, willing to accept, happy enough, as a standard for marriage. That woman would have forgiven Bob for the email exchange, would have found a way to rationalize his continued emotional connection to Linda, would have kept trying to save a marriage that couldn't be saved. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd found my strength, my voice, my sense of my own worth. And that woman, the woman I was becoming, deserved better than this. I deserved a partner who chose me first every time, without hesitation. I deserved a love that didn't require me to compete for attention and loyalty. I deserved better than being someone's backup plan. Tomorrow, I was going to have to make the hardest decision of my life. But for the first time in months, I knew with certainty what that decision would be. The next morning, I woke up before dawn with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and for the first time in months, I felt no doubt about my decision. I got up quietly, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pen. I had lists to make, plans to formulate, a new life to design. Bob came downstairs at his usual time, looking haggard and uncertain. He'd clearly spent the night thinking about our conversation, probably hoping he could find the right words to convince me to keep trying. "Good morning," he said cautiously, studying my face for clues about my mood. "Good morning," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "Sit down, Bob. We need to talk." Bob poured his coffee and sat across from me, the same spot where we'd had so many difficult conversations over the past 2 months. "I've made a decision," I said without preamble. "I want a divorce." Bob's face went white. "Maggie, please, don't make any hasty decisions. We can work through this." "This isn't hasty," I said. "I've been thinking about it all night, but really I've been thinking about it for weeks. Every time I convince myself we can save our marriage, you do something that shows me you're not truly committed to letting Linda go." "I can let her go," Bob said desperately. "I can cut off all contact. I can delete my email account if I have to." "Bob, you don't understand. It's not about the contact. It's about the fact that you don't want to cut off contact. Every boundary I ask you to set, you resist. Every commitment you make, you find a way around. You care more about not hurting Linda's feelings than you do about rebuilding trust with me." Bob started to protest, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Let me finish," I said. "Yesterday you told me you care about Linda, and you can't just turn that off. That was the most honest thing you've said through this whole process. And it's exactly why I can't stay married to you. But caring about someone doesn't mean I want to be with them," Bob argued. "Maybe not," I said. "But it means you're not fully available to be with me. I can't rebuild emotional intimacy with someone who's holding part of his heart in reserve for someone else." Bob was quiet, perhaps finally understanding that this wasn't a negotiation. "I called a lawyer yesterday evening," I continued. "I'm meeting with her this afternoon. Maggie, 45 years of marriage. Our children, our grandchildren, our whole life together. Are you really willing to throw all that away?" I looked at my husband, and for the first time in weeks, I felt completely at peace with my decision. "Bob, I'm not throwing anything away. You threw it away when you chose to have an affair. You threw it away when you chose to share intimate thoughts and dreams with another woman instead of with me. You threw it away every time you prioritized Linda's feelings over my trust. So this is my punishment. You're leaving me to punish me?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm leaving you to save myself. I'm 72 years old, Bob. I don't have decades left to keep trying to fix something that's broken beyond repair. I don't have years to waste being someone's second choice. Bob put his head in his hands. What about growing old together? What about the life we planned? The life we planned ended the day you started your affair with Linda. This is me making a new plan. What kind of plan? I looked down at the lists I'd been making. I'm going to sell the house. I've already called a realtor, and she's coming this afternoon after my lawyer appointment. I'm going to buy something smaller. Maybe a condo in that new senior community over by the lake. Bob looked up shocked. You're selling our house? I'm selling my house? I corrected. After the divorce, half of everything will be mine, including half the value of this house. I'd rather have my own place than continue living in the same house where I found you with another woman. Where am I supposed to live? That's something you'll need to figure out, I said. Maybe Linda can help you decide since you value her input so much. Bob flinched. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Bob. It's not fair that I had to discover your affair by walking in on you. It's not fair that I spent months trying to save a marriage while you were secretly maintaining a relationship with your mistress. It's not fair that at 72, I have to start my life over. But fair doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I do next. What about the kids? What are we going to tell them? I'm going to tell them the truth. That their father had an affair. That we tried to work it out. But that you couldn't let go of the other woman. I'm going to tell them that their mother deserves better than being someone's backup plan. Bob was crying now, and part of me felt sorry for him. But I'd spent too much energy over the past 2 months feeling sorry for everyone else. It was time to focus on what I needed. Maggie, Bob said through his tears, I love you. I've always loved you. Please don't end our marriage. Bob, I said gently, if you loved me the way I deserve to be loved, you never would have started an affair. Free, and you certainly wouldn't have kept finding ways to maintain contact with Linda after promising to end things. I make mistakes. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, Bob. This was a series of choices. Choices to lie to me, choices to betray my trust, choices to prioritize another woman's feelings over mine. And every time I gave you a chance to make different choices, you kept making the same ones. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the finality of what was happening. When? Bob asked finally. The lawyer said it could take several months to finalize everything, but I'd like you to move out as soon as possible. Maybe this weekend. This weekend? Bob looked panicked. Where am I supposed to go? You could stay with Tom and his family temporarily, I suggested, referring to our oldest son who lived about 30 minutes away. Or you could get an apartment. Or, I paused, then decided to say what we were both thinking. You could see if Linda has any suggestions. I'm not going to Linda, Bob said firmly. Why not? You've been more concerned about her feelings than mine for months. You've shared more intimate thoughts with her than you have with me. Maybe it's time to stop pretending that relationship doesn't matter to you. Bob started to protest again, but I cut him off. Bob, I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's true. You developed feelings for Linda that you were never willing to fully let go of. Maybe without the guilt and secrecy, you could actually build something real with her. I don't want to build something with Linda, Bob said. I want to rebuild what I had with you. But you can't rebuild it, because you never fully dismantled what you had with her. And I finally understand that you're not capable of doing that. Bob was quiet for a long moment. What if I am? What if I really can let her go completely? I looked at him across the kitchen table, this man I'd loved for most of my adult life, and I felt something that surprised me, pity. Bob, I said softly, it's too late. Even if you could let her go completely, which I don't believe you can, I don't want you to do it for me anymore. I don't want to be with someone who has to force himself to choose me. I want to be with someone who chooses me naturally, easily, without question. I did choose you. For 45 years I chose you. You chose me when there were no other options. When Linda came along, you chose her. And every time I've given you the chance to recommit to our marriage, you found ways to keep one foot in her world. Bob had no answer for that, because we both knew it was true. That afternoon, I met with the lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s named Catherine Walsh, who specialized in divorce cases involving older couples. Mrs. Henderson, she said after I'd explained my situation, I want to make sure you've thought this through carefully. After 45 years of marriage, divorce will mean significant changes to your financial situation, Your social circle, your living arrangements. I understand that, I said. But staying married means accepting that I'll always be competing with another woman for my husband's emotional loyalty. I can't live that way, Catherine nodded. I've seen situations like this before. The affairs may end, but the emotional connections often don't. It's very difficult to rebuild a marriage under those circumstances. She walked me through the process, the timeline, the likely financial outcomes. By the time I left her office, I felt overwhelmed but also relieved. I was really doing this. I was really starting over. When I got home, Bob was sitting on the front porch with 2 suitcases beside him. I called Tom, he said as I walked up the steps. I'm going to stay with them for a few days while I look for an apartment. That's good, I said, sitting down in my usual chair. Maggie, Bob said. I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for the affair, but for all of it. For taking you for granted, for not appreciating what we had, for prioritizing the wrong things. I know you're sorry, I said. And I'm sorry too. Sorry for becoming so passive in our marriage, sorry for not speaking up about what I needed. Sorry for letting us drift apart. Do you think? Bob hesitated. Do you think if we'd handled things differently from the beginning, if I'd come to you when I first started feeling disconnected, if you told me when you started feeling taken for granted, do you think we could have avoided all this? It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about myself. Maybe, I said honestly. But we can't go back and change what happened. We can only move forward from where we are now. And where we are now is getting divorced. Where we are now is me choosing myself, I corrected. For the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing what I need over what's comfortable or expected or safe. Tom arrived a little while later to pick up his father. I watched from the porch as Bob loaded his suitcases into his son's car, as they talked quietly beside the vehicle, as Tom looked toward the house with an expression of confusion and sadness. Bob walked back to the porch to say goodbye. I'm going to keep hoping you change your mind, he said. Please don't, I replied. It will be easier for both of us if you accept that this is really happening and start figuring out how to build a life without me. I don't know how to do that. You'll figure it out. You're stronger than you think you are. Bob leaned down and kissed my forehead, a gesture so familiar and gentle that it almost broke my resolve. I did love you, Maggie, he said. I know I didn't show it very well at the end, but I did love you. I know, I said. And I loved you too. But love isn't enough when trust is gone. After they drove away, I sat on the porch alone for the first time in 45 years, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where Bob and I had built our life together. I should have felt sad or scared or regretful. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected: excitement. For the first time in decades, I had no idea what my future would look like. I could go anywhere, do anything, become anyone. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That night, I called all 3 of my children and told them about the divorce. The conversations were difficult. Tom was angry at his father, Jennifer was supportive but worried about me, and my youngest, Danny, was shocked and asked if there was anything he could do to help his parents reconcile. Honey, I told Danny, sometimes the best thing you can do for people you love is let them start over. Over the next few weeks, as I prepared for my new life, I was surprised by how little I missed Bob's daily presence. I'd thought I'd feel lonely rattling around in our big house by myself, but instead I felt free. I could eat dinner whenever I wanted, watch whatever I wanted on television, go to bed and get up according to my own schedule. I started taking long walks through different neighborhoods, imagining what it would be like to live in various parts of town. I visited the senior community by the lake 3 times, and each time I could picture myself there more clearly, in a bright condo with big windows, maybe with a small garden space, close to other people who were also starting over. Sarah Chen came by almost every day during those weeks, bringing food and company and helping me sort through decades of accumulated belongings. How are you doing, really? She asked one afternoon as we packed books into boxes. Better than I expected, I said honestly. I keep waiting to feel devastated, but mostly I just feel free, relieved that I don't have to keep trying to save something that couldn't be saved. Relieved that I don't have to keep competing with Linda Morrison for my own husband's attention. Relieved that I can stop pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Sarah nodded. You seem different, Maggie. Stronger. More like yourself than you've been in years. She was right. I did feel more like myself, or maybe I felt like a version of myself I'd never had the chance to become, confident, decisive, unafraid to take up space in the world. 3 months later, the day before I was scheduled to move into my new condo, Bob called. "Maggie," he said, "I wanted you to know that Linda moved back to town." My stomach tightened. "Okay? Why are you telling me this?" "Because she asked to see me, and I wanted to be honest with you about it." "Bob, we're getting divorced. You don't need my permission to see Linda or anyone else." "I know. But I wanted you to know that I said no." I told her that ship had sailed, and that I needed to focus on figuring out who I am without either of you in my life. I was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected development. "How do you feel about that decision?" I asked. "Sad," Bob said honestly. "But also right. You were correct about me, Maggie. I wasn't able to fully let her go while we were trying to work things out, and that meant I wasn't fully available to rebuild our marriage. And now I realize that I need to learn how to be alone before I can be with anyone, whether that's you or Linda or someone new entirely." It was the most mature thing Bob had said through our entire ordeal, and it gave me hope that maybe he really could grow from this experience. "I'm proud of you for that realization," I said, and I meant it. "Maggie," Bob said, "do you think there's any chance that someday, after we've both figured out who we are as individuals, we might find our way back to each other?" I thought about his question carefully before answering. "I think we're both going to become different people over the next few years," I said finally. "And I think those different people might be capable of having relationships that the old us never could have had. But I don't think those new people will be us, Bob. I think they'll be new versions of ourselves who need different things and different kinds of love. So that's a no." "That's a I don't know. And I don't need to know right now. I'm focused on figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's wife." The next day, I moved into my new home, a bright, airy condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I'd furnished it with a few pieces from the old house and some new things I'd chosen just for me. It felt like a fresh start in every possible way. That first evening in my new place, I sat on my small balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset reflect off the water. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, accommodating, conflict avoidant, willing to accept, happy enough, as a standard for her life. That woman would never have had the courage to leave her marriage. That woman would have kept trying to save something that couldn't be saved, kept accepting less than she deserved, kept shrinking herself to make room for other people's needs. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was 73 years old, and I was finally ready to start living. My phone buzzed with a text message from my neighbor across the hall, a woman named Ruth, who was also recently divorced. "Wine night at my place Friday. There are several of us here who are starting over, and we think it's worth celebrating." I smiled and typed back, "I'll bring dessert." As I looked out over the lake, I realized that Bob had been wrong about one thing. He'd said our whole life together was thrown away, but that wasn't true. Our life together had given us 3 wonderful children, countless happy memories, and 45 years of shared experiences that had shaped us both. The marriage was over, but the life we'd built together would always be part of our stories. And now I was ready to write a new chapter, one where I was the protagonist of my own life instead of a supporting character in someone else's story. 6 months later, I would meet a kind, intelligent man named David at a book club meeting in my new community. We would become friends first, then companions, then partners in a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's inner lives. But that's a different story, for a different time. This story is about the day everything fell apart, and how falling apart turned out to be the beginning of everything I never knew I wanted. This story is about discovering that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a life that no longer fits, even when you don't know what comes next. This story is about learning that it's never too late to choose yourself, to demand better, to start over. And most of all, this story is about understanding that, when everything falls apart, sometimes what you find in the ruins is exactly what you've been looking for all along. The courage to build something better.